Hot off the heels of the announcement during LVO of the new Lumineth Realm Lords, we got an update from the Warhammer community post today about some of the origins of the Lumineth, and it's actually pretty interesting. So today we're going to just kind of quickly go through this. It probably won't be a really quick video. It's these little news videos I kind of want to keep to sub 15 minutes as best I can. I tend to get long-winded, but we'll see how that goes. So we get a really good peering, I guess you could say, into the lore of the Lumineth Realm Lords in this post here, and it's actually very interesting. For a long time we know, or for a long time we've heard about the lore of the elves from Tyrion, from Teclis, and from Malarian, Malarian. I always forget his name. So the origins kind of set up that after they extract the souls from Slaanesh, the Dark Prince, after they captured him and pretty much waterboarded him to get the souls out in the hidden gloaming, Tyrion and Teclis went about essentially creating their own races. And it's really interesting here because from the Idoneth Deepkin lore, we know that Teclis created the Idoneth Deepkin, the Sithai. And from that, it was, of course, a failed endeavor. These are the very last souls to be consumed from the world that was. So they were the first souls to be extracted. And from this, Teclis was not able to really recreate the high elves of the world that was that he wanted to do. That was his main goal with the Idoneth Deepkin. But interestingly enough, with the Lumineth Realm Lords, we actually get a very stable and a very, I guess, similar incarnation of the High Elves. And it's interesting here. Let me get it here. Here it is. Of all the spirits drawn forth from the slumbering chaos god, the most stable and pure became known as the Lumineth. They settled within Haish, the realm of light, a paradisal land of geometric perfection. There, the Lumineth grew both wise and powerful from the teachings of the twin gods. And this is actually one of the first articles that we get a lot of mentioning of both Tyrion and Teclis together when it regards the Lumineth. In the actual Age of Sigmar LVO preview of them, it was just really talking about Teclis himself, and the whole portion of Teclis, the kind of teaser on him, it was just talking about Teclis. A lot of people were thinking maybe Tyrion won't be included in this army and he gets his different army, but so far, we've seen the Spearmen, we've seen the cavalry units, and we've seen Eltharion as well as Teclis. And this is really, again, the first time we see Tyrion kind of lumped in with Teclis. I mentioned them as the two among them were the twin elven gods, Tyrion and Teclis. So as we kind of progress through the lore here, though, we get a very interesting take on the situation. It seems that the Lumineth Realm Lords were essentially kind of flawed, very much in the same way that the Sithai were. The Sithai, rather than being kind of dark, the Lumineth, rather than being dark and reclusive like the Sithai were, it seems like the Lumineth were prone to emotional outlashings of fancies, I guess you could say. It kind of sounds like they had some dark elf inclinations towards them. Let me see if I can get it here. Despite their nobility of spirit, the history of the Lumineth Realm Lords is far from without incident. For no elf could suffer an age of torment having been consumed by Slaanesh and emerge unscathed. And it essentially talks about how their emotions were their downfall, much in the same way of the lore for the Dark Eldar, and how the Dark Eldar spawned, or I guess the Eldar spawned Slaanesh himself, and then thus created the Dark Eldar. Interestingly enough, though, the Dark Eldar are what the Eldar were at the height of their empire. It's kind of an interesting little juxtaposition there. But with the Dark Prince of Chaos, it kind of mentions that this kind of nascent emotional turbulence creates a downfall that they refer to as kind of a self-destruction moment. And then they kind of fall back on the teachings of Teclis. Interestingly enough, again, the same teachings that the Idoneth Deepkin eschewed and pushed away from. So the teachings that saved the Lumineth are the same teachings that the Idoneth said, no, we don't want those. So it's a very, very interesting bit of lore here. And maybe it's because they were in this realm of light that just kind of meant they were a little bit more predetermined to win out against this emotional backlash. It's hard to really say. I mean, this is, of course, a very light smattering of lore. This isn't the kind of in-depth many pages at the beginning of an army book that we typically would see, or I guess battle tome, since we're talking about Age of Sigmar. But this period of enlightenment became known as the reinvention, and it inspired every aspect of the lives that they now lead. So now when we take a look at the Lumineth Realm Lords, reading this whole little paragraph here, we get something very indicative of something similar to Warhammer 40k Tau, where they have a set caste system, something similar to the Eldar, where they kind of take things in a measured tone, where everything is kind of very heavily meditated upon, and things are not so quick to anger, or there's not as much hubris attached to things. And then we get that little bit of the Warhammer 8th edition High Elf smattering in here, right? Where by dedicating themselves mind and soul to the pursuit of furtherance in their chosen path, the Lumineth could better avoid the lure of Slaanesh. Now we see this when we talk about the Tower of Hoeth and the lore masters, the sword masters of Hoeth, and whenever we talk about any of the many mages of the High Elves, it's very much that singular dedication to a singular path that kind of creates, I guess, a bit of tranquility for them. So it's a very interesting kind of pulling of multiple lores from the Warhammer universe to create the Lumineth Realm Lords. And I find it very interesting as well because they're very elemental driven here. It says, following the teachings of Teclis, the Lumineth also learned to communicate with and even channel the geomantic spirits of Haish, specifically those of the mountains, rivers, wind, and zenith, or sky. So basically you get this this very interesting approach too, almost like a monastic kind of approach for this warrior culture. It kind of talks about how the spearmen, the phalanxes, are unmoving like mountains, so that the waters of the enemies can crash against them essentially, and how the mages bring down bombardments from the skies. It's very interesting in how they use stones and rocks. So I expect this army to be very heavily defensive, with a lot of infantry units, spearmen, something akin to the sword masters of Hoeth probably, and then a lot of magic from both the casting lords, from a lot of different mages, things like that. And then, of course, a lot of cavalry. It talks a lot about the cavalry being pretty much a huge centerfold, whoops, centerpiece of the army itself. So it's a very interesting kind of approach that they're taking. Again, taking this typical high elf and not making it this over-the-top, arrogant, poncy hairdresser, and making it more akin to something that's like, hey, we're a little bit more tempered in our emotions this time around, but there's kind of a dark subtext to all that. They talk about the aetherquartz, which are, again, a little bit of a nod to Eldar and their spirit stones. Not so much in the sense that it holds the spirits of Eldar past, but instead that it's used to kind of focus mind, body, and soul, and helps empower. And at the same time, any of the nascent emotions that are kind of flying all over the place for the Lumineth kind of get focused into the aetherquartz and actually drain the aetherquartz of its power. And eventually this aetherquartz will dim out and become just a simple like black stone that they then discard to get a new aetherquartz to then further their empowering, their focus, and so on and so forth. And it kind of talks about here at the very end here. So with each gem discarded, the Lumineth become more mentally, physically, and spiritually gifted, yet grow colder and more aloof. So that's probably why when we took a look at the picture of Teclis, he looks very kind of removed. He doesn't look like a benevolent lord here, or a very kind god, not in the same way that I would imagine Tyrion is going to be portrayed. He does look very removed. He does look very aloof. Kind of taking a look at his Age of Sigmar, his End Times lore, where he is kind of an asshole. So hopefully we get something that kind of explains his demeanor coming up here, that we can get a final kind of say, as a lot of people are scared that this will be End Times Teclis, which is, again, kind of a dick, ends justify the means. Or is he going to be just a simple elf god with, his typical tantrums of aloofness? But it's very interesting to see how this lore is kind of shaking up and forming. This is, of course, part 1 here of the Lumineth Lowdown, as it is called on the Warhammer community, part 1 Origins. So hopefully we'll get a further expansion on this in the coming weeks and or months. This just might be the first teaser after LVO. We probably won't hear anything about these guys for about a week or two. Hopefully sooner, though. My projection here is that the Lumineth Realm Lords will release in conjunction with the Warhammer Total War Warhammer 2 DLC that will probably be focused on the High Elves. I bet you they're going to do those things in conjunction. So I'd say any time from March to May will be that timeline. I don't think they'll put them out here in February at all. I think this is definitely a March to May like launch schedule for the Lumineth. And I think that kind of fits in very well with Total War Warhammer 2. So we'll see what happens in the coming months. I am absolutely going to be covering these guys a lot more because I'm very interested in their lore. I mean, I really love the art direction on these guys too. It's really, really interesting. It borrows a lot of the really cool aesthetics from the High Elf Spearmen, but it combines a lot of very different and unique things that are also still very elven, right? We get these shields that are very indicative of something of the Eternal Guard from the Wood Elves, but also hint very heavily towards stuff we see with Lord of the Rings elves. And these helmets themselves too have a really, really cool aesthetic to them. So I'm really, really curious to see how this kind of plays out in the coming weeks and months. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Look forward to more news and updates from the Warhammer community page for both 40K and Age of Sigmar as they come out. Anything cool, awesome, and exciting, I will definitely be covering. But again, as always, have a good one and take care.